Welcome to Hawthorn University's Holistic Health and Nutrition webinar, and I want to thank you so much for joining us as we welcome DeAnna Batdorff for an exciting presentation of traditional tools in nutrition. This is such a great and timely topic, and DeAnna, it's really so special to have you with us too.
Thank you so much.
Yes. And for those of you who don't know her, let me give you a little bit of background. DeAnna is the founder of the Dhyana Center in Sonoma County, California, and the Certified Ayurvedic Education Program there. She holds licenses and certifications in cosmetology, aesthetiology, massage therapy, planetary herbs, clinical aromatherapy, nutritional counseling, and she has completed many clinical internships. She's a contributor to several publications and has been sought out for interviews and as a featured speaker. She also volunteers her time generously. She created the Ayurvedic Donation Clinic for the underserved population and is the executive director of Aushudhi Health Foundation. It's a nonprofit supporting people through the heart of Ayurveda. DeAnna is a clinical practitioner and educator and has been working with the HIV/AIDS clientele for the past 30 years. Autoimmune disorders are her specialty, as well as working with high-risk health issues and rehabilitation. She's supported over 100,000 clients in her Ayurvedic practice and is ultimately an advocate for prevention, education of the human body, elemental theory, and what it means to stay or become healthy for each individual. DeAnna says Ayurvedic self-care is the best health care we have. Understanding food as medicine through an Ayurvedic lens can empower each individual to listen and understand body communications and to take action through food choices. So today, together, we get to learn about what Ayurveda is, about the elements and the doshas, discussing personality traits, physical characteristics, and symptomatology, what foods and remedies benefit each individual's constitution and circumstances, and we'll find out when these supports are appropriate too, examples of how to apply elemental remedies in specific circumstances, and how to spice up your life with the use of spices as medicine, flavor, and satisfying cravings. And from all of this, we're going to be able to apply some tools in our nutritional practices too. So, goodness, DeAnna, you're covering a wide range of topics here.
I was like, wow, I want to take this class.
Right? I'm really glad to be here. And so I don't want anybody to miss a thing. So I want you to know that we're recording this and it'll be available for replay on our website in just a few days. We'll likely go 75 minutes for the presentation. We'll follow that with a question and answer period. So don't hold back. Write your questions or your comments into the webinar question panel at any time, and we'll certainly respond to your questions and comments at the end. Okay, I'm your host, Paula Bartholomew. I'm one of the founders of Hawthorn, and with all that said, it's time for DeAnna. It's really a pleasure to have you with us here. I'm so excited for this presentation and to have you on with us live, DeAnna.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to start just by letting everyone know that I studied nutrition, and Paula was my teacher, who I really saw as like my primary teacher, as I had about 3 different teachers at the Bowman College. And that was actually, I think, 22 years ago. And I've been watching Paula just grow her world here. And so I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And we've been in relationship for some time now. And I've really wanted to be a part of this. And so I feel very good to be here today. And I want to thank everyone who's here for joining me and wanting to hear what I have to say. I take that very serious as a teacher, that concept of, like, you know, really feeling like you're moved to hear something, and it really moves you enough to say, I want to know more about that. And
well,
for
we're
me,
really eager to learn more from your expertise, DeAnna, and just to really help support us to understand this material and actually be able to incorporate it too. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm really going to jump into this, and we're going to look at these traditional tools for nutrition. And they date back some good 6,000 to 10,000 years ago in India. And it's an ancient medicine, and it was a beautifully designed science that they took hundreds of years to design and to work out all the kinks. So the one thing I love about Ayurveda is this idea that it is a life knowledge, or what they call science of life. And they really looked to the outer environment, and then they looked into our inner environment, and they started looking at all the parallels between the elements outside, ether, air, fire, water, earth, and how do those elements work in our inner terrain, as we also have a landscape. And so it just really strikes me as such a natural, easy way to look at our body, where some people get a little, Ayurveda, sometimes somebody will be like, I really feel it, but it's slightly complicated. So what I'm here to do for you today is to take the complication out of this traditional science and really get down to the user-friendly foundations that Ayurveda offers, because you don't have to be an Ayurvedic practitioner to necessarily be using Ayurveda. And if you can look at two foods and say one of them tastes and looks warmer, then you are using Ayurveda, because everything is through assessment. And they're really looking at the value of, like, symptoms tell you everything. What you see is exactly what's going on, whether that be the tomato telling you it's got a warming effect, or whether that be, a cucumber, which shows you how cooling it is. And so Ayurveda puts everything into this beautiful combination of hot or cold or wet or dry. And sometimes we're more dynamic. In fact, often we're more dynamic. You might be cold in one area of your body, like cold stomach, and you might have a hot liver. And then that just means your food combining and your way of looking at nutrition becomes a little bit more dynamic about what are the liver foods to cool it down, and what are those, say, stomach foods that are going to warm it up. And so we're always looking at how do you combine, whether it be emotional, physical, food as medicine, or looking at even our vitamins, our minerals, and our plants. Every one of those have chemistry, and that chemistry is based on the elements. And that's really where Ayurveda shines. And I just want to take one tiny moment to take it beyond medicine from India, which is where Ayurveda's from, and just let's paint this beautiful global picture, because really any traditional medicine that I've studied, and I like to pick a different tradition every year and kind of dive in and learn a little bit, but every single one of them around the world do have one thing in common, and that is that they are elementally designed. And they saw that Mother Earth, and all the elements there mimic us. And then they just had different ways of communicating it. The thing I like about Ayurveda in the way that it communicates this phenomena is really that it is a mind, body, and spirit medicine. So it's looking at your emotional terrain as well as your physical terrain, and then what is your core knowing, or what is your soul's desire, and what do you know is really going to support you. I love using this with, say, a client where they're kind of like, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. And in Ayurveda, you don't really want someone just doing it because you told them to. It's actually more, how does it feel? Do you want to do it? Does it sound right to you? Do you want to try it and make sure that it actually is providing you something? So that's the soul in this medicine, is the client or yourself being able to say, well, I figured out I was cold here today, so I'm going to warm it up. And then, within 3 to 5 to 10 days, you start recognizing, like, wait a minute, I think I am a little warmer. Something is a little stronger in my spirit, giving me some fire. And so they really like putting it to the test. Like, the client's going to be able to tell you, because the symptoms are going to either go away and they're going to be more at ease, or it's not going to go away and they're not more at ease. And then you have to go and look in a different direction. And so this is one of the things I really just think is brilliant here, is the elements are undeniable. Whether you look into chemistry or even pharmaceuticals or plants or food, it doesn't matter what direction in chemistry I go, I'm still looking at graphs, organic chemistry based on north, south, east, west, which is hot, cold, wet, dry. And so that's what we're going to really explore today. And the words that kind of get people like, I don't know what I'm doing here with Ayurveda, are really Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Okay, these are Sanskrit words. I'm going to keep Sanskrit at a minimal since we're doing user-friendly, use of these tools today. But these words are still very important. And what I think is a really important thing to know is Vata represents anything that is in constant change, and it represents the word change. Whereas Pitta is about anything that is in assimilation, like bile is a beautiful solvent in the body and it breaks down fats and converts them. So that's an assimilation. So fire assimilates, and it's about focus to get that done. And then we have Kapha, which really means nourish, but it's the idea of water and earth. And if we think of this idea of congestion or phlegm, water and earth make mud. And so it really would be the imbalance of that would then create a congestive state. But all of these have healthy foundations as well as a way to track your imbalances and to really look at all of the things that we can read as symptomology. And so here we are, these 3 doshas. And the doshas, what this word means is the humors. Okay, that's the actual translation of the word dosha. But really what they meant by humors is like specific characteristics. So these are going to be a characteristic that's like, I have a cracking joint. That would be dry because you're feeling bone to bone and there should be juice in there. So think about wind, vata, that ether and air. Wind is bound to chap you. So it's things that make you cold and dry you out. And so when you get really cold joints or cracking joints, we know that that is a vata symptom. If you got inflammation and pain in your joint, it would be representing pitta, which would be fire, which is the word of inflammation. And if you got a lot of edema and got a little waterlogged and a little swollen, or you were getting dislocations of joints, then you would know that that is kapha, and there's a little bit of muddiness, there's a stagnation that doesn't have enough blood flow, and so it's causing things to just kind of sit there, like water sitting versus water flowing. So they took this concept, which is like, think about a river out in the world, and just like, okay, there's a dam in the river, things are going to flood back. Knock on wood, there's a fire in the river. We know it's going to dry everything out and it's going to completely destroy, but transform that region. And if you don't have any water in that river, then you're going to have a gravelly riverbank. And so they just started breaking this down into every part of the body. And what I'm here to do with you today is to really even talk about the parts of the body that represent vata, pitta, kapha, and why they represent, not just something you have to learn, but it's nice to make sense of something. So it's just second nature, because how we work is second nature. We live in these bodies. And so when we start thinking about how they tick in particular ways, it's really this innate empowering tool to be able to be like, wait, this is my body. I can figure out what's going on. And it speaks. It's communicating. So it's really just a way of tracking how your body's communicating to you. And the first way we do this is by figuring out what characteristic is showing an imbalance. So I do want to be really honest. These words vata, pitta, kapha get used a lot. They're in every magazine and every book, and they're referred to. And I've been doing this 30 years, so it's been really fun to watch it kind of grow and just move into the whole world. But really, change, focus, nourish is a more tangible way to think of these words. Am I changing too much or too little? Vata, too much or too little vata. Am I focusing too much or too little? That's going to be connected to too much or too little fire. And am I kind of sitting, am I congestive or sluggish, or am I kind of sitting in my nourishment more than flowing in my nourishment? And then you're going to be more in kapha. Okay, so they broke down every single part of the body, which is what I'm speaking of here in this handout. Every tissue, every organ, every channel, every system, every gland. And they did the same thing for the emotional body. So as we get further into this, we're going to start looking at what are the emotions, the organs, and the tissues for vata, pitta, kapha that really tell you what are their main functions. Okay, so a really important part here that we're also going to dive into is this elemental picture. Okay, so even before we have doshas, now I always like to talk about them first and open up to the doshas because people are so curious about these words, vata, pitta, kapha, and what do they mean to them. So we'll go there. But I do want to take a moment just to remember that the doshas are combinations of elements. So for instance, that vata is ether and air, and ether is empty space, okay? And air is anything in motion. And so they know that you only have empty space, ether, until something moves and transforms it and creates movement in that space. And so ether and air are constantly working together. And that's where we start looking at what are the dynamics of this in the vata. But the nice thing about the elements is that, you know, everything that exists is made of matter and matters. And that is the elements in the most simplest form I could explain them. And they're in a continual flow. Okay, so they're not just standalone. They actually all work together. And in Ayurveda, we call this the Pancha Maha Bhutas. Pancha means five, Maha, great, and Bhutas, elements, the five great elements. And we start looking at what is the value of each one of these five elements, and then how do they serve one another to keep the world going round, to keep the human existence happening. You know, we are made of matter, and we matter, you know, and we are made of these elements. And so here is where we're just going to really dive into this beautiful picture of, you know, what is ether, air, fire, water, earth, and what do they have to offer you, and why are they important to you? What is their job in the body, and how does it relate to food and nutrition? Okay, so one thing we want to know, and I'm just going to do a really quick and, you know, kind of overview of each one of these elements. So first off, ether. Ether's empty space. Okay, it's really it's nothing. It's cold, and it's considered nothingness, and it's inertia. It's stillness. And it's actually the thing when they look at soul-based medicine, it's the concepts of meditation. How do we get to stillness? How do we get to nothingness? But you have to create space for that. So ether is space. Nothing happens without space for it to happen. So ether is imperative, and it's the first element because nothing happens without the space to do it. Then we have air. Air is the motion that comes in and does something within space, within ether. And so there we have the ether and the air. And yes, we'll get to how they work together when we talk about vata, but really important to remember that that wind, again, if it hits your, you know, face over and over, you're bound to get chapped. So whereas ether is the word cold, air is the word of constant change, which dries us out. Whether it dries our skin from wind change or, hello, look at, you know, everything going on in the world and how much change there is. And it's really depleting for people because, you know, it keeps us in motion more than in just this really calm, juicy flow. And so vata is known for these types of things. Air is known for those types of things where it's like, you know, just really trying to figure out, you know, what's drying me out. And then when we look at fire, now fire needs ether and air. If you're going to build a fire, you're going to need some space in between the logs. And then if that's not enough, you might need a little wind to come up, or you might blow on the fire and it enkindles the fire. The most interesting thing about fire as an element is that it's variable more than the others, meaning like too much fire and water boils and it evaporates and you end up right back at dry. Okay, too little fire and that water that is next element turns to ice and it goes back to ether, cold. So fire is a really important element. It's so important that we made a whole bunch of different nursery rhymes and things as we were young, you know, to say like the porridge isn't too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right, you know. So warm is really the moral of some of these, you know, stories. And just what is it to have the right amount of fire stoking your system? Think of that about your gut for all those people who know about nutrition and how the digestion works. We need fire to break down and assimilate and absorb, but we also don't need too much fire or we end up with inflammation. A lot of people don't think about how much fire affects water and how much this water is in motion from fire that is behind it being energy, fire energy, not just like enkindled fire. And so think about the wave at the ocean, and that wave comes in and goes out. The wave might be bigger, the wave might be smaller, but it's constant. And we know the moment we lose that constant wave and that flowing of water that is so just familiar to us, we know something's going to be really wrong in our environment, right? And so this is the ether and the air and the fire making the water flow. And that's the same thing as gravity. You know, you give water gravity and it's going to go that direction. It's got motion, you know? And then water is really special with earth. And the reason for that, and then we'll kind of break it down into a couple, but the reason for that is because that water flows and earth becomes the structure. So you end up with a riverbank so that water can actually get from one place to another. Think about this in the human body. You have a blood vessel, that's a riverbank, and you have liquid blood running through it, which allows blood to get from one place to another with structure. So earth gives us structure, and it really allows us to have the stability to actually have ether once again exist, because it's cyclical. It keeps going. So it goes ether, air, fire, water, earth, back to ether, air, fire, water, earth, like that. And so earth really gives us the structure and the kind of thorough ways for water to be able to get where it needs to go. So I'm really just giving you elemental theory 101. And it is the same thing we do when we go to science or chemistry, for sure. Same exact theory. It's just now we're kind of putting it into the context of human functions. Yeah, but that's our 5 elements and how they work together and what do they really do individually. Now, those elements are very intertwined. They're constantly working together, and there's no reason to chase ether around and then like go chasing after fire, and then all of a sudden you're over there with earth. Really, the easiest way for us to look at this is seasons. So we have winter, cold. We have spring, dry until we get our water. We have our summer, hot. And we have our fall, which is more wet. And so this is how we look at our elemental terrain. So it goes from 5 elements to 4 main seasons. And then when those are not working well, when the elements are not able to help each other, and when the seasons are getting a little bit imbalanced, then we end up with these 3 primary words: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And this is where we really start saying, wow, something's going on. My ether and air are just absolutely getting stuck in a cycle, and I'm getting very Vata. And again, I'm going to explain what that means, or you start flaring fire and you just don't know what to do with all this inflammation, and fire rises and it starts showing up in the skin in all kinds of other ways. And then you start saying, whoa, I'm really stuck in an inflammatory response. What's going on? And you know that you have become too Pitta. So I just want to again remind us that these doshic words are a little bit more about when an imbalance has become a pattern. So doshas is where we look for patterns and things that are not functioning in the way they should. Whereas the Pancha Mahabhutas, the 5 great elements, and our seasons are more, how do we track ourselves on the daily? How do we change our food on the daily according to what season we're in, but according to how our inner terrain seasons are doing? And so this is really one of the most beautiful, and what I have found to be the easiest thing, no matter whether I'm teaching, whether I'm teaching here in Sonoma County, or whether I'm teaching in India, or whether I'm in Spain, wherever I am, I'm able to have this conversation that is seasonal. I call it our weather report, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Just how do you track your weather report? We all know weather reports all over the world, but do we think of our own weather report? How hot or cold am I? And how wet or dry am I? Okay, so we're going to break this seasonal picture down just a little bit more here, and we're going to look at the natural order, and we have the elements, the directions, and the seasons. So first things first, ether is cold and it's of the north. So even if you're in a hot country, the north is going to be a little cooler because, you know, of its direction. And it's also going to be people energetically, like if you think of this as like, you know, okay, well, am I of the north? Do I run cold? You know, how much ether do I have? Well, you might want to see how direct, how cautious, how much do you run on, like, you have to know and plan, and there's wisdom relation. And these are all just different types of people, and they're very routine oriented. So for instance, when somebody runs kind of cold, I have to know that I can say, oh, take a teaspoon and a half of ashwagandha every night. And they're like, well, teaspoon or a teaspoon and a half? And I always say, I want you to kind of play with it a little. Like, how much do you need? Because they get really routine where they're like, you know, I'm going to level that teaspoon off perfectly. And that perfect is going to make me better, instead of it being like actually getting warm and warm flows. Warm turns things liquid, you know, and there's more flow there. But the beautiful thing about people who run cold is they've got great boundaries and they're really routine oriented, much more than me. I don't run cold, you know, and that's where they really have their value. And then let's look at this as a season itself. So this is winter. So what is innate for changing too much ether or cold in the body? Hibernation, individualism, replenishment, anything warming that you can think of doing. Now, I think we naturally do this, like who wants to eat soup in the winter versus in a hot day in the summer? So there's things we do innately. We put more, you know, clothes on in the winter to stay warm. We maybe take a bath, or we sit next to a, you know, heater or a fireplace. We seek out warm to combat and do opposite of cold in wintertime. But it is an innate time for hibernation, and it doesn't mean you give up everything and stop working, and, you know, it's not like the ultimate hibernation, but it is inward, and it's very individualized, and it's designed to stay warm, stay put, and do your time of replenishment. Whereas air is going to be of the east, right? Inland is always drier than the coast. And this is spiritualism. This is diversity. They're visionary. They're very community oriented. So when somebody is feeling a little dry and they don't feel like they have a lot of juice to really be in service, I always remind them that they're great networkers, and they're really good at, like, you know, going into any type of community and just starting to say, hey, do you know about this? Or have you heard of that? Great networkers, you know, and they just know how to kind of ebb and flow amongst the world. And they're in the spring. So this is them expressing themselves. This is creativity, establishing roots, or establishing even the watering of something. Spring, you have to water everything so it can actually blossom into that summertime. And this is really a beautiful concept of nourishment. So this is the time when nourishment is so absolutely imperative to making sure that we really are watering ourselves and watering the garden so we can get to those sprouts with the sun coming. And speaking of which, that's fire, water, hot, right? So this is of the South, always warmer in the South. This is focused, it's leadership, it's detail oriented. They're very analytical, you know, and this is also summer. So this is going to be an extension of blossoming. And it's going to be like you're developing something. You watered it, you hibernated, you thought about it, you planted, you replenished enough so you had the juice to do it. You watered it in spring. Now it's time for it to blossom towards the sun, the fire, the heat. And this is when we need the most cooling. Again, let's remind ourselves, we do this all day long. We put our jacket on when we get cold. We take our jacket off when we're hot. When we get really dry, we get thirsty and drink some water. And if you get a little bit of this wet, which is the next one, water, earth, if you get a little too wet, that's where it's going to be a lot more connected to, you know, things that are going to be more in this time of autumn. And it's wet is a good thing. It's of the West, it's stable, it's the caretaker, it's provider, very long term. Sometimes somebody can be very fixed in long term. I committed, that's it. And I'll be like, okay, but that job isn't making you happy. So how long are you going to stay if there isn't happiness? Or how are you going to make that happiness happen if you're staying? And so sometimes you have to water and earth is mud. Sometimes you have to stir the pot here, but the beauty of wet is this idea of providing stability. And here it is in autumn, which is where we are now. Time of completion, follow through, longevity, and it's also our time of cleansing. Okay, they say soak the pan and flush and do water flushes and water cleanse in the spring. And this is our time to actually cleanse the intestines and really think about intestinal clearing, everything down and out, so that your immunity going back into winter hibernation doesn't have anything holding it up. It doesn't have anything in your epicenter of what needs to get out in your colon. There's nothing in the way of congestion you might get being able to drain through. And so we clear the intestines and do our cleansing this time of year. And we do that for our longevity. And it really is this time of year that in Ayurveda, this is the time of year where everyone's like, follow through. What did I start? I need to either finish it or I need to button it up to a good place so I can actually see what comes in my replenishment time of winter next. And so we are in an innate cleansing. The main thing I see with people here is they see cleansing and they just immediately think liver. And they're like, yes, that's what I need to cleanse. Well, if the intestines aren't a clear avenue, and if they're not freed up, you're going to excrete your liver and it's going to dump into your intestines. And then it's just sitting amongst already a bunch of debris that's there in the form of fecal matter. So this is why I'm going to be a little bit more, I'm taking a moment to be clear that clearing your intestines frees up your liver to actually dump and detox itself. And the liver is really, really smart. There's times when we want to detox it, but in Ayurveda, intestines first, and then, so sometimes I'll have someone do intestinal cleanse for the next 2 months. And then in the very last month of autumn, then you'll really target the liver because you opened the pathways. And that way you're not getting, detox symptoms, which is all fire rising. Oh, I got skin rashes. I got angry. I got a headache. In Ayurveda, they're like, that means the detox pathways aren't open. And so your body is expressing that it's not moving the right direction. And so that means fire is rising up versus being able to get down and out, which is the most innate way we cleanse and stay healthy, is through our colon and our intestines. Okay, so this is just the beginning. We've just gotten started. Hopefully you're enjoying class, but we're really just painting this picture, and we're going to go into further details, but we're painting a picture of like, what if you were hot and you did cold food? And what if you knew you were feeling kind of congested and wet and kind of sticky and muddy, and you said, whoa, let me cleanse for a little bit until I don't feel this way. And then you change your food accordingly. So in Ayurveda, we're always looking at who needs what and when do they need it. So there's no diet for everybody. There's no one food that every single person should eat. They see everything is edible, which is why I have a course called Edible Ayurveda. They see everything that is edible has a value, and it's more about who needs it and what quantity, and in what season do they need it, which gives a lot of freedom for food, right? It's not like I don't get to eat that and I do get to eat this. It's all about when and how much. And that changes everything. I love giving people freedom in their food. Even if I say, hey, you're hot, could you eat cooling? And let's talk about all these no to avoid foods. I like to use the word KNOW. So I always say no to avoid. I don't want to set you up for failure. But these are the foods that would be smart to avoid. Most you can. And so if somebody has a small no to avoid list with a big yes list, it's a lot easier for them to acclimate themselves and say, I'm going to add these foods and then I'm just going to see if I can avoid those foods best I can. And that's really one of the ways Ayurveda works. It's a balancing act. You look at your weather report, you look at what's balanced, what's not balanced, and then you make these decisions to do the opposite for anything that is not feeling right for you. So we do this all day long. It's just taking it into little finer details. So let's keep going here with our presentation. Great, and we looked at in nature. Okay, this is good. Yeah, let's look at this beautiful picture of like, now how do we take this a little further in the body? Okay, so we have gaseous exchange that happens in our body systems. This gaseous exchange is the beauty of ether and air, this idea of space and wind. Okay, so it moves through our hollow spaces, and it's all about gases being exchanged, broken down, or released from the body. And this is really Vata's like primary, which is why it rules the intestines, because the intestines are where we have our primary gaseous exchange. Okay, we assimilate in our stomach, it'll be a Pitta organ, and then our intestines are these hollow organs that are all about breaking down and having gaseous exchange, and then knowing when we need to release it out of our body. Okay, and it's peristalsis, constant change, those intestines, everything like that. And not only small and large intestine, but also lungs and heart. So think about this, lungs are expanding, contracting, and they're all about gaseous exchange. Okay, oxygen, carbon dioxide, all kinds of things. Heart is pumping as a mechanism, and it has multiple valves in and out of it, in those chambers of the heart that are keeping everything exchanging in a gaseous form, not just blood moving through it. And then you have your primary seat of this, which is your intestines, small and large. Yeah, so this is really the ability to have chemical process. And we need it to break down into minute gases so that it can actually, seep into our cells and into our tissues to support us. Now we have fire and water. And fire and water is all about heat and liquid. The best way I can explain this is we need heat to assimilate, like in our stomach. We need heat to break down our food, at least the beginning of breaking it down. And then it turns to liquid so we can absorb it. So fire and water's job, as we will call it Pitta, is assimilation and absorption, transforming food into liquid. Think of it as macronutrients breaking down into micronutrients. And that is our heat to liquid exchange, okay? And this is really about having fuel of energy to process and assimilate. So it is considered that it's as much the metabolism of your brain and your experiences, which become emotions, as much as it is the metabolic breakdown in your gut. And so we always look at that as the brain and the gut are connected because they're both assimilating and absorbing in their functions, which is fire and water. And these four organs are all assimilating and absorbing organs. We have the stomach, we have the liver with its 600 jobs, we have the gallbladder, which stores bile that the liver made from protein, and it helps you to spit it out into the intestines and convert your fats into essential fatty acids. And we have our spleen. And a lot of people don't know what the spleen does, but it's our immune organ. So what does it assimilate and absorb? Foreign invaders. So whether that be mold or a yeast or a fungal, which is yeast, or whether that be a parasite or an amoeba, some microbial virus, infection, bacteria. So this is anything that needs to be broken down that is of a foreign invader state. And that's our spleen's job. And by the way, the spleen is dependent on the liver. The liver's over here on the right side. It's the size of two hands, and over here is the spleen, the size of one extended hand, and it's over here on the left. So your spleen and immunity health is based on your liver health. And I just think it's an important thing to know that the two of those work together. Yeah, they call it the king on the masculine side of the body. Your liver is the king, and they called the spleen the queen on the feminine side, and how they work together, So nice little piece on the masculine and feminine relation to the body. Okay, primary action, the focused action necessary to break down all things and to be able to utilize it. So that is the function of fire and water. And then we have this water again, but this is more liquid exchange, like not just the breaking down and absorbing, but it's like liquid itself, water content, plasma, blood, and then earth, our structure. And this is really about the waterworks, being able to get liquid nutrients from one place to another through liquid exchange. Okay. Water's wet, so it's really a matter of survival. So sometimes when I'm teaching this class in person, I'll say to people, hey, somebody raise their hand if you have a way that you feel we will survive without water. So anybody have an idea on how we will survive if we run out of water outside? And everyone's kind of like, I'm not raising my hand. And I always say, I'm not raising my hand either. So I always remind people, hey, we're 60% water, just like outside. So if we're worried about the water survival out there, why aren't we thinking about our liquid exchange and how much nutrients or how much hydration do we have as a primary health value that really becomes our blood pressure? So our water volume is based on how much pressure is in our environment. So when we have good water volume, our blood pressure is just flowing with ease. But when we have low water volume, we have low blood pressure and our blood isn't flowing with ease. And then we have to push our adrenals and push ourselves to get things done because we don't have enough of this water and earth stability and juice to really get that done in the body. So people give up their water really easy. And that's why I put that into this piece and just how, it's everything for us. Now the earth takes us back to ether. So we end up back where earth is cold, dry, hot, and wet because it's a culmination of all the elements feeding each other. And then it again becomes, the holder for you to have ether, exist once again. What is this in the body? Those 4 organs, like I mentioned with the others, these are all waterworks. So the kidneys are the oceans of the body. They actually run in an infinity cycle, cycling your blood and assimilating water and moving water so that you have good exchange of flow of your heart. So kidneys are the oceans, and then we have our bladder. People kind of take the bladder for granted, but I want to remind us that we would flood without a bladder. So it's very important we're able to get extra fluid out of our body. Then we have the sac around the heart, which is a lubricated sac that keeps everything really calm so our heart isn't pounding out of our chest, so we don't get tachycardia, or irregular heartbeat like arrhythmia. And this is the pericardium, the sac around the heart. And then this is an interesting one. If you know your systems really well, someone might already be reading this and be like, cardiovascular, how did that end up in organs? Well, in Ayurveda, they see anything that is vital that you cannot live without is considered the word organ because their word of organ means vital. And so we can't live without our cardiovascular being intact. So they actually see it as an organ in itself, even though we talk about it as a system, But if that system went down, we would definitely be compromised, just like any of these other organs. Okay, primary action of this water and earth is to nourish and to sustain us, nourish us, follow through, and build security and stability. So the juicier we are, the more water and grounded with earth we have, the more flow we have, the more stable we are. And it shows up in our body by having healthy energy and being able to go with the flow, because stress doesn't stop, things coming at us don't stop, things need to get done, those things don't stop. But it's more about when you're juicy, you can kind of buffers it a little and allows you to kind of ebb and flow and be like, let me just take a moment and think about this, versus when we're out of juice, it just feels like, what am I supposed to do? And we get really lost. We get in the air, get stuck in the ethers you know? So this is the primary functions of the elements in the body and how they start really relating to our inner landscape. Okay, so now that we've looked at this, and let's keep going with our slideshow here. Yeah, so with this in mind, and that was all just how we tick, right? We were just talking about balance and like if you get too cold or too hot or too dry, and we have a little questionnaire later to kind of help you figure it out. So I'm not going to just leave you not knowing. But once those elements become fixed or in a habit or what we call a pattern, they are going to become more stuck in a particular way of being or a particular characteristic. And this is where we end up back with these words of imbalance, actually, even though there can be positive things here, of Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Okay, so now we're going to take a little time. I'll let you grow into this. Hopefully you're going to be, I hope you're so excited about class that you want to read over your notes again, or maybe even print them out and be able to just really start saying, I wonder if I start tracking myself this way, how much can I figure out and how much can I change quicker, you know, in myself. So I hope you're going to put this into action, you know, after class. But let's really pay attention to this and look at this. And right now we're just talking about Vata. Ether and air, right? Empty space and motion, the idea of constant change. Now, by the way, it has a mantra, which is the leaf never lands in the same place twice. Okay, so sometimes a Vata person, who's somebody who knows what Vata is, they'll be like, oh my gosh, that's so me, you know, because they know that they're kind of like, let me go do this. No, let me go do that. Oh, I got this great idea. Oh no, now I should go do that. They might have a little bit of indecision, or they might be a little out of body because they're of the ethers, right? They're of the ethers. And let me just say this for Vata, because some people will get really caught up on these body types we're going to talk about. And they're kind of like, I want that body type, or like, why is that one there, but this one's this one? And I'm always like, well, let's really talk about how they ended up with body types, because they were more of an assessment than any kind of judgment. So ether and air, look, can't even grab it. I cannot grab ether and air. I can make air, but I can't, it's not tangible. So these people innately are more close to the ethers, meaning really tall, or they're petite and they're thin, like air. Air and ether is thin. And this person just innately runs thin. Okay? If you don't innately run really thin, and then all of a sudden you start losing a lot of weight, you know, you might be like, what? Something's different. But some people just don't gain a lot of weight. And this is the Vata person. Okay? Now we're combos. You might be a Vata Kapha. You know, we are dynamic. We're individuals. Don't get stuck in any box here, right? These are concepts of like where you might stand in a grouping or pairing, but you don't want to get stuck in one box. We are combos, right? Because we have all those organs. So we're a combo of all of these. But this is the person who is going to dry out and get cold easy. And they do run more petite. They have very high metabolism. And that's why they stay thin. But I am going to be honest, and let's look at the emotions that are on this list. As petite, you know, or as thin as this person might be, they don't always feel so buffered in the world because, you know, there's less padding. There's less actual insulation. And they're ruled, if you look at the tissues, by bones and nerves, which are constantly changing, just like air and ether. Okay? So they might be on the edge with their nerves, but the emotions that show up for this person is going to be anxiety, indecision, fear, hyperactivity, and guilt. Now, the word guilt in Ayurveda is quite interesting. It actually translates directly to the word shame. So when somebody is like, I don't think I'm guilty. I don't say sorry a lot, or I don't know about guilt. And then I'll say, well, what about shame? You know, or humility, you know, getting humiliated or embarrassed easy. These are things that are really common. If you're wondering if you have Vata, these are the 5 main emotions that you're going to want to really target. There's 2 primary of those 5 though. Fear is cold and anxiety is dry. And since this is ruled by ether and air, cold and dry are your primary words to look for in symptoms. And they're the symptoms that you're going to see in this list. And then it's also going to be those primary emotions. Now, some people, it's hard to know if you have anxiety or fear. So, they could be correlated. They both are vata, but they would be the key words you'd want to look for to know that you're experiencing vata itself, if you're experiencing those emotions. Or if you have those emotions and they're not dealt with, you might end up with physical symptoms that fit in these categories. Now, the first place vata shows up outside of their body structure and having small bones, right, is their skin. So the moment you start getting dry lips, you should know that the rest of your body is also drying out. It's the first place to go dry, according to Ayurveda, okay? Even before, say, you get constipated, which is going to be in this list also. So this person does dry out. And not only will they get dry lips, but they might just feel like their skin is always a little rough or dry. And they may also notice, just the reality is that the plum is juicy. And then when the juice is out of the plum, we kind of are more of a prune. And so the one thing that is not always fun for somebody who says, I'm vata, is that they do age a little bit quicker. And they do get aged spots. People will be like, oh, these are just age spots. And I'll be like, they are, we call them that, but really we go back to the ethers. The older we are, the closer we are to death. And we go back to the ethers when we leave this world. And so we actually come in very juicy kapha in a perfect world. And then we have the longest time of our life is very pitta. And then we go back into vata. We also lose our hormones. They change. And so we run drier because we don't have the same juicy hormones. So a lot of people aren't just feeling vata their whole life. They'll kind of hit this wall later, 40s on, and they'll be like, something's changed. I can't remember. And my eyesight is going away. And I've got this ringing and I've got receding gums. I hope you're listening to these symptoms because they're all vata, right? If something is drying out and receding back, tightening up and receding, that's vata, dry. If you don't have enough nutrients in your ears, they're going to ring, from reverberation. You might get more dry eyes. You might get drier skin, or drier hair. So these are all going to be those signs that you're looking for, okay? You may have been dry your whole life, and that just means that maybe constitutionally, like looking at RNA, DNA, you might be more vata dominant, and that just might be a part of who you are. And they're spiritually driven. And they go with the flow really well, and they're super flexible people. So it's not just all bad, there's a lot of great things that go into each one of these categories too. But the thing Ayurveda's really good at is they are talking a lot about, like people say, this sounds so negative. And I'll be like, well, it can sound negative, but it's based on being able to be honest with yourself about what isn't working and what doesn't feel right. And then allowing yourself to have the ability to say, that doesn't feel right, and let me do the opposite and see if I can change it. So they are tracking those symptoms all the time, okay? Big part of vata that I want to talk about, and if it's okay, we're going to talk about stool. And, we really shouldn't be doing nutrition or eating food without just getting very comfortable talking about what came out after that food we ate. And this is not a conversation we shy away from in Ayurveda at all. In fact, it tells us everything about how that food worked or didn't work for us. Okay, so vata runs constipated. Now this could be, I don't feel like I have a bowel movement every day, but it doesn't feel complete. Mild constipation. If you skip a day, that's considered constipation. If you can skip up to 3 or 4 days, unless you help yourself, some people help themselves with a stimulant like a caffeine. Some people help themselves with a laxative, or maybe even licorice or slippery elm, like something lubricating to create smooth move, right? But if you are not able to have a bowel movement without doing those things, that's also considered constipated. And that's just dry out. That just means there's not enough lubrication to move the stool along through the plumbing and to follow through and get it out, which is interesting because Vata has a hard time with follow through. You know, they'd rather kind of like, oh, exciting, let's start something new again. You know, I like to play this out and do this and play and do, you know, and sometimes they'll open up lots of can of worms and then they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. I have to button all these up, you know. So follow through is not the easiest thing. They do get better at follow through the more the bowels are clear, you know. So some of that sometimes is just you don't have the energy to do extra or follow through because there's a whole bunch of energy trying to get those toxins, that stool out of your body for you. And then it wastes your energy that way. The only last thing I really want to mention that I think is very important before we see what else we want to learn tonight, and I want to make sure I talk about each one, is really looking at rabbit pellet stool. So that is more when somebody is cold and low blood pressure. And it means that, you know, cold, we shiver and we contract. And if you keep contracting and getting cold in your intestines, you know, like the person who eats really, really alkaline, but maybe they run cold and they're not recognizing alkaline as cold pH. So they need to add some spices in there and spice things up, you know. But they just think cold, cold, cold is the way to go. And it causes this rolling around of the stool and it makes round pellets. And, you know, funny because we call it rabbit pellet, and rabbits are actually the emotion of fear and they run really cold. So I find that very interesting that they innately have pellet stool, but we do not. So if that's more how your stool is presenting, there's going to be a lot more warming that's needed in the diet. Okay, here's those organs again, those hollow organs for gaseous exchange, bones and nerves constantly moving and shifting according to your experiences. And it is going to be the upper chakras, your throat and your third eye. If you are Vata, this is spiritually driven. You know, they are all about what moves them by spirit. You know, intellect is not their everything, you know, as much as spiritualism is. And they do get a lot of insomnia under stress, you know, so that would be the one thing we look at as like, okay, you've got constipation, you've got dry skin, you have some cracking joints, and you have some anxiety. My next question to that person is like, that's 4 Vata symptoms. I wonder if they have insomnia. Do they have a hard time sleeping? And so that's a very good question to the person who maybe you think has had Vata for a really long time. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to Pitta. And as we look at Pitta, we want to remember it's solar, it's fire, and we always say fire and water together, right? This person, look at the picture, you know, active, you know, they're on it. Look how focused that is, you know what I mean? And that's really, really the idea here. They are solar energy, they innately lead, they definitely like to form intellect. So they're of the mind and intellect. Okay, now that can be just like Vata can leave their body and leave themselves high and dry and they have to inhabit better. Pitta can be so focused that they're kind of not thinking about the other people around them, you know? So they might be so focused that they're like, my opinion, and that's it. So really what Pitta needs to learn is how do you work in teams? If you're going to lead, how do you allow other people to come along with you? And a smart Pitta is going to learn that, like, if you learn how to delegate and pass on some of the work to everyone else, you're going to get things done a lot faster because, you know, 10 people can get a lot more done than one. So it is something they have to learn, but they're very good at being able to figure out, how am I going to delegate and execute and get this, you know, happening. So they are very directed body structures with muscle on it. So they might have like really squared off shoulders, really chiseled, designed chin. They might have very directed nose, very defined lips. They might have very straight hips. These are just the ideas of how somebody formed as a Pitta being when they were in the womb, you know? And so these people do not have a hard time building muscle. So they exercise, they know they want to move fire, so they naturally exercise. And not only that, but they just innately build muscle on bone. You know, it's not a hard thing for them. So that's how they're designed. And they do gain weight pretty evenly. So Pitta's not really the person who's going to want to lose or gain weight. You know, usually they're going to be more about their muscles, and they might say, I'm losing muscle tone. And that means they're losing fire, you know, because if we look down the list, there's 2 tissues for Pitta, and that is going to be muscle and skin layers. Now, skin layers, what is that? Fat cells. It's all distribution of fat cells. And let's remember, fat cells make up all of our padding, our insulating, our buffer in the world. So very much about our solar self and being able to, you know, keep our heat intact. So muscles and skin are the name of the game. Now fire, if it's not moving through those channels down and out, fire is going to rise. And so as that fire rises, it shows up in the skin layers. So this person, you know, and maybe you know, maybe you've had acne at one time in your life, or you had a skin rash, or you got hives, you know, or you got prickly heat, you know. The simplest form here would be a sunburn, you know. But anytime, you know, you can get worked up, or you can eat something and it gives you a skin condition that has any bit of red or inflammation presenting, you know that Pitta is now pushing out and up, instead of fire moving down and out to the earth through those intestines, which is what keeps us from getting inflammation. So one of the main ways we work with Pitta is cooling down the stomach and cooling down the liver. So aloe vera is your perfect example, and I did give you some remedies later. But anything you can do to have those bitters that collect the fire and move them through your system for you. Yeah, so alkaline is really needed here. And they don't need as much heating. They already are in that heating. Okay, so here we have the skin. We also have that mind. We have the emotions. Let's look at the 5 emotions of Pitta. We have anger, resentment, judgment, trust, and envy. Some people have a very hard time with that envy. They're like, I'm not envious. And I'm like, well, just, you don't have to tell me anything, but just think about jealousy, or like think about, you know, how do you beat yourself up according to what somebody else might have achieved? You know, how much are you achievement related? And then how much are you relating your achievement to somebody else's achievement? So envy doesn't have to be this horrible, you know, thing. It might be something that's just really driving, like, oh, you know, like when I'm teaching young girls, I always say, you know, you want to watch that envy where you're like, they look so good in that jacket and I don't look as good in that jacket. And, you know, just what is it to be able to say, no, I look good in what I chose to wear today. You know, this is my jacket. And use it as like an encouragement. But Pittas are ruled by the eyes. So what they see and what they can visualize to get done is really powerful. But it can also become that, you know, kind of that judgment, you know, or developing trust off of like having a story that got embedded into your place of fire, which is ruled by the eyes and the muscles and the skin. Okay. So a lot of times with Pitta, I'm trying to help them to, you know, I have them put castor oil in their eyes at night just for that cooling, calming, and our 12 cranial nerves are behind our eyes, and you put that castor, make sure it's organic and clean, but you just smear a little bit in those eyes. It's goopy, go to bed, but it'll just calm down the cranial nerves and kind of satiate that fire and really help your mind to calm down. Okay, Pitta can get insomnia. But the insomnia they get is like, she said so-and-so, she said so-and-so, or tomorrow's my class on Hawthorn Health, tomorrow's my class. I didn't do that last night. But if I was in my Pitta, who knows, you know? So they get very fixed on a situation of insomnia, where Vata is kind of uncomfortable and shifting and moving and trying and, you know, a different kind. Okay, so now that we've looked at these things, let's talk about the bowels so we can move on to Kapha. You know, time is escaping us. I have so much more to say. And in this Pitta, this is anytime something has liquefied too quickly from heat. Think about butter in a pan, right? It's nothing until the heat is on, and then you put too much heat on it and it's everywhere. And so this is going to be diarrhea. and it's going to be heat in the releasing of your stool, and it also rules the odor of our stool. So when you have more of a sour, pungent, acrid odor in your bathroom after having a bowel release, know that that is based on different toxicity, and inflammation is more there, and it shows rancidity. Something did not move quick enough, and it went rancid, it went putrefied, and it turned sour. And so our odor is the way we read toxicity in Ayurveda, and it's how we read Pitta. So let's look at Kapha, okay? Kapha is water, earth, and they really are the caretakers of the world. So they're all about nourishing everybody else. One of the issues for Kapha that happens, because they're all about love, 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 love. They get so jazzed up and excited and running on gratitude from taking care of people and making people feel good. So if others are happy, the Kapha's like, you're happy, I'm happy. But sometimes I have to remind somebody with Kapha of like, but what really makes you happy? You know, I'll see a Kapha client and they'll be like, oh, I want to bring my daughter, and I want to bring my partner, and I want to bring my grandmother. And I'm like, you're actually getting an appointment right now. Like, this is for you right now. But they're just always excited to share and help. The problem for Kapha is they are water, earth, so they are very physical. Vata was spiritual. Pitta was intellectual. This is the person of the physical. So if they give and give and give, what happens is they go home, and they really didn't eat and give to themselves, and then they overeat, and they might overeat too late at night. Or they might do the like, I worked so hard today, I deserve pizza. And they're like, yeah, I deserve it. And since I'm having pizza, why don't I just get some cookies too? You know, and so they'll end up refilling their physical with maybe not the exact right food, because they end up with the hypoglycemia. They waited way too long, and then now they're just like, give me the thing I just want to eat. You know, maybe it's not going to be the salad, you know, any longer. And so they end up with some imbalances around food. Vata may not eat enough, and I need them to eat more. You know, Pitta, they kind of, you know, are very play related with their food. Kapha, they're like trying to rebalance themselves with food, but it's not necessarily going to help them in that way. So they have low metabolism and they have poor circulation. So naturally, their body type naturally is just thicker skinned, and they have bigger bones. So if I really want to know how much Vata, Pitta, Kapha someone was born with, I want to look to the bone structure. So small bones, Vata, linear, very focused, kind of moderate bones everywhere, Pitta. Bigger bones, rounder bones, Kapha. Okay, and that tells me their constitution. Somebody's meat on their bones could be part of their constitution, but it could also be connected to patterns and trauma, you know? And so we can't always look at someone's weight and exactly consider that that's who they are forever. That's who they've become. But Kapha naturally has more weight on them. And since they have poor circulation and poor metabolism, they certainly get more sedentary. That water and earth makes mud, and they end up having a hard time with exercise. Like I'll say to Kapha, like, what about walking in the morning? And they're like, yeah, tell me something I don't know. Like most Kaphas are like, I need to exercise, but how do I actually motivate? And what I usually tell them, to be honest, is I put my tennis shoes at the toilet. That's how I trained myself. I was like, no, I walk every morning, but it took me years. And I was like, I'm going to put my tennis shoes at the toilet. It's the first thing I do in the morning is go urinate. And I'm like fumbling over my tennis shoes. And I'm like, I got to put those things on, and I got to get out, and I got to get some oxygen, and I got to make sure I keep my water flowing. So this is something that is, you know, really important for the Kapha in their primary issues. Let's look at the emotions that are also kind of muddy, kind of heavy, right? So depression, attachment, grief, melancholy, and attachment, grief, melancholy, greed. That one I always forget about, you know, Hopefully it's not me. You know what I mean? And I don't feel that way at all. I just give everybody everything I have. But greed is one that is here. And I don't want you to think this is just greedy. I want you to know that this is the person who's considered the hoarder, or the person who gets attached to material items. So they find their security with food or items that help them to feel like they're physically safe. Okay, so usually that's just a matter of figuring out, you know, how are we going to build safety that isn't around items, you know, and it's more about the flow and what's going to make you happy. But these are the main emotions that just really get sticky and sluggish and affect people. Okay, stool wise, this person is going to have, now often Kapha comes to me and says, I think I'm Kapha. Only thing is I have diarrhea. And that's Pitta. So now what? And I'm like, well, you could be both. But I'm going to be really honest that Kapha moves a lot of mucus, and their food turns to mucus easy, and they don't do good on mucus forming foods because they're too sticky. And so if they're eating too much bread and cheese, you know, or even just cheese, you know, if they're having oats in the morning, but not really adding any enzymes or anything to help convert it, they'll get sticky and they will have wet stool. And they may think of that as diarrhea, but diarrhea here would be odorous, you know, pressurized, you know, whereas this is going to be just more wet stool that moves through you very quickly and bulks up a lot. So Kaphas will often have the symptom of like, I feel like when I have to go to the bathroom, I have to get to the toilet like now. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's liquid, you know, and this is not a problem with smooth move, and it does pressurize. So this person gets a lot of pressurized gas from a lot of that congestion bulking up in their intestines. And so, you know, this is really a matter of like stomach metabolism and keeping things moving for them. Okay. And let's talk about just a couple symptoms and we'll move on with our slide here. But this is going to be upper congestion, not just congestion from something you ate in the gut. So most congestion starts in the gut and then starts getting in the system. But sometimes somebody's upper lymph immune, and I have other classes on that topic. But if you wanted to think about your immune system and how much it's connected to your sinuses, that is a whole nother picture for Kapha as they get poor circulation. Their upper sinuses get very coagulated and they have a fair amount of congestion. And so that'll usually lead me to looking at what they need or don't need in their diet. So if Vata is dry and cold, they don't need dry and cold. They already are. So they need the opposite. So they need nourish and they need warming. If Pitta is hot, they need more cooling. And if you have more Kapha, you've got more of that water and earth make mud. And so this person needs more cleansing. So see how this kind of plays out as a weather report? Like, when do I need to cleanse? When I've got too much Kapha, or even Kapha emotions and they're getting heavy. When do I need alkaline cooling food and bitters? When I'm Pitta, when I'm too hot and inflamed. And when do I need nourishing and warming? I need that when I'm depleted and I'm running out of juice, and those things are going to replenish. And so that's how we really look at how did our symptoms get here, but how do you use these hot, cold, wet, dry, you know, elemental theory to really be able to say, where am I at and what should I eat? So let's look at the next slide and see where that takes us. So what I'm going to do here, instead of teaching this to you, because I have other things to say, these were an add-on anyway, and these are handouts that we just give out freely, you know, to people, just so they can start learning about themselves. And so this isn't much different than what I said, but what's cool here is it breaks it down into Vata in your lymphatic system, your kidneys, and your intestinal weakness, which are the three primary places that are affected when you have too much Vata, and there's your symptoms. And then what's on the next page is just what to do. So you have your trine of hydration, electrolytes, essential fatty acids, and probiotics. And then we have all these beautiful warming wet foods. And then as we look at, I don't know where the Pitta one went, but as we maybe it's after that Kapha one even. But as we start looking at this, because that's the Vata list, let's keep going.
Yeah,
We'll just
Pitta's
talk about
after
Kapha.
Kapha.
Okay, perfect. So let's just talk about Kapha. And this is just going to be, well, what does Kapha look like in the lungs when they get congested? Or what about the circulation? Or what about your, again, immune system? And you want to be able to say, yeah, what are my primary places where Kapha could reside? And what are those symptoms? And then you've got all these beautiful remedies, and everybody gets the trine of hydration. Everybody needs hydration. But Kapha, you're going to see, is very cleansing and motivating, and they're the one who should be the raw foodist. You know, they should be doing the juicing and the green drinks and salads all day long, you know, because it's opposite of congestion. So let's look at the Pitta one, because you can grow into this. I hope this is not going to be the only time you look at this. I'm hoping you're going to want to play with this concept. And then we have the Pitta, and what does Pitta look like in the immune system? It's all inflammatory. And what does it look like when it gets too much toxicity in the blood, which is what happens when things haven't assimilated and absorbed correctly. So we end up with blood toxicity and things that are about fire rising. We even say boiling blood, you know, that boiled my blood, old saying, you know, and anger relates here. And then what is it to have digestive inflammation? And what are those symptoms to read, like bleeding gums? And then there's all of your cooling alkaline remedies. So I'm hoping you're going to look at these lists and kind of like your body type and your stool and your emotions, and then also looking at these common symptoms and think about what's chronic. If you took, and I believe the questionnaire is next, if you took the questionnaire and used these handouts as a questionnaire, think about what's chronic, because you could probably check off every symptom you've ever known. But you want to think about what symptoms are really with you and affecting you long term. So you can really focus in on the most long-term issues and what is needed to change them. Now we're to a fun part, right? Who needs what? So the who needs what really goes back to that same list I just showed you of like cold and dry needs warm and wet. And so I went through and just gave you what are warm and wet spices. Ginger, celery seed, basil, curry blends, cardamom, pure ocean salt, which is pure electrolytes, you know? And then what are these supporting taste factors? You need sweet, actually. Now, healthy sweet, not processed sweet, but this person needs like fruit and raw honey and root vegetables because they're grounding and strengthening. And then they need their electrolytes. And then everything in the medicinals are going to be nourishing the nerves and strengthening the bones. This person also needs, you know, vitamin D3. You know, I have to target foods that are going to give them high D3, which is also root vegetables, because I want to protect their bones. Okay, so let's keep going. And I even gave you a note to avoid. If you're dry, don't eat dry. So watch crispy, crunchy. Doesn't mean you can't eat raw. Raw is good. But if you only ate raw, it is called roughage. So too much raw food would be too much dry. And then we have the Pitta. And that's the alkaline cooling. So look at those spices. Do they seem more cooling when you put them in your space? These are spices I think most of us already know. Dill, fennel, cilantro, mint, turmeric, coriander. These are all beautiful alkaline, super, super cooling and anti-inflammatory. And they get raw. They get raw, but they also get wet and very alkaline in their meals. And blood cleansing, all the anti-inflammatories and cucumbers, these types of things. Okay, let's keep going and we'll look at the Kapha. I say give 10-day challenge to this concept. I just want to put that out there. Like think about a 10-day challenge. Figure out who are you? And if you're a Pitta Kapha, avoid the Pitta Kaphas and say yes to all the yeses of Pitta Kapha. You're going to be a combo. So just combine the lists, you know, and that's how you're going to do this. But if you tried it for 10 days, I think, you'd be blown away at how it really does respond to the opposite of how you're feeling. Cleansing, motivating, juicing, raw. They also get spicy. Why? They get spicy because pungent is what liquefies congestion, and it also is what motivates the blood. So it's blood building. So they do get enough spicy there, like black pepper, fenugreek, ginger, cinnamon, that type of thing. Asafoetida, specific for stomach fire. It's the one spice that has the most hydrochloric acid in it of any other spice in the group, right? And you can smell it. It's got that kind of sulfur relation telling you how sour it is. And everything in here is stimulating, invigorating, expectorating. And look at them. They get the vinegars and the ferments and the citruses. Very cleansing, and that's really what Kapha needs. So just as we finish up here, because I'm already past time and we got questions, but let's just see what else is here, and you can grow into this. And really, I have a physical and an emotional questionnaire for you. So again, think what is chronic when you ask these questions. And it's not a one-time questionnaire. You can use this today, try for 10 days. You might be like, I don't know where I'm at. I don't know what I need anymore. And you could go back to the questionnaire, and you might be in a different season, and you're hotter, you're colder, and you need to switch your food up. And this is what keeps us from getting bored. And it also allows us to think about how we're going to combine our food. So again, who needs what and when do they need it, right? So this is just a really great physical and emotional symptom list to really play with. So in that questionnaire, and again, please take it more than once, but think chronic, and be honest, like don't do it too quick, like really think about how do I feel about guilt? How do I feel about anxiety, anger, resentment, and also, or depression, and also relate it to where do you think that came from? Was there an onset? Is it just like your dad or just like your mom? Or did you have an onset in a relationship? These are really important things for emotions. Cause and effect is a big part of Ayurveda. You can always see how someone's affected, but getting to the root cause is how we unwind somebody from an unhealthy state back to a healthy state. And then just so you know, all those spices, I wasn't here to teach you every spice in the world anyway, but I sell a lot of spices and a lot of the things we mentioned at DeAnnaCenter.com. And the spices are broken down in a way that you can just play. So I've never seen spices broken down this way. I created this method, but I broke them down into warming, cleansing, warming, nourishing, and cooling, cleansing, cooling, nourishing. So you'll be able to just use this spice list and be able to really say, okay, wait, is coriander what? What is coriander? What is cumin? So next time you go to use spices, maybe have your spice list next to you that you printed out here. And you can just be like, okay, I'm using cumin, coriander, and fennel to make this meal. So what am I making? And you're going to find out that you were making a mostly cooling with one warming. So you made it perfect, and it's nourishing and cleansing. So if you put cumin, coriander, and fennel together in Ayurveda, it's called Tridoshik. And Tridoshik is when you found perfect synergistic balance. So how do you cook for a meal for a whole family? Usually I say, well, people put different spices on their food. The person who's cold, you give them some warming spices. The person who runs more hot in the family, they put more cooling spices on their meal. And then that way everybody gets to vary one meal, right? So, we only need to be cooking one meal in a family, but who puts what on that meal is where it gets really fun, and it gets individualized in a family. Somebody who runs cold needs kimchi. Somebody who runs hot maybe needs dill sauerkraut, So that way it's not just flavors. It's what am I taking in as medicine? And yes, I have some beautiful healthy habits there. And then I also have this nice list of what are healthy foods for you? So let's just look at this list for a minute. Cold needs mostly cooked. So the cold and the dry need mostly cooked. If you notice on this list, hot needs half cooked, half raw, and then wet should be mostly raw. And so when somebody comes to me and says, do I need cooked or do I need raw? That's really dependent on how hot, cold, wet, or dry they are. So this way you can get really specific, more than just raw food is good, everybody needs it, but who needs it as a dominant and who needs it just sometimes, or maybe like for cold or dry, they should do it with soup. So then I'll say, always have your salad with like a cup of ginger tea or with a bowl of soup. There's a reason we eat soup and salad together. You know, they balance each other out and make, you know, harmony together. One's hot, one's cold. You made just right. You made warm. So we want to be thinking about that when we combine our foods in a meal. And that's also why I broke your spices down the way I did, so that you could start really looking at them as hot, cold, and nourish or cleanse. And what are you intending in that meal is the spice you would want to pick up for flavor. Yeah. So hopefully this class is going to absolutely support you in figuring out how to spice up your life and just what do you feel, and then do the opposite. We could have stopped class at that. I could have said, hey, if you're hot, cold. If you're cold, hot. If you're wet, cleanse. If you're dry, nourish. And like go out there and try it. And we would have been already putting Ayurveda into action. But we went into very nice details. Like we broke them down, all the symptoms. We broke down our foods. And now you have this beautiful list that is helping break down all of your spices. So my hope for you, and I'm ready for questions, but my hope for you is that you really play with what I'm teaching you. And I hope you're inspired to dive in and see how much this makes sense, how much the elements and our seasonal self just really makes sense. And it allows things to be simpler, not so complicated. Yeah. Now here's a really good one to look at, which is edible Ayurveda. So I don't know if any of you know Mary Sheila Ganella, but she is my co-teacher in this course. We've been teaching it for about 5 years now. It's an online course and it's called Edible Ayurveda. Really important thing, first off, the link's right here if you want all the information, but we did make a special, we started this class last Friday, but it's not too late. Like we just started. And it is brilliant in the way that we break down every part of the body, symptomology, liver, symptoms, cold liver, hot liver, wet liver, dry liver. We look at mindful eating, we look at emotions, we look at all the foundations of Ayurvedic Nutrition 101, and then we start going in from the mouth to the stomach, to the small intestine, to the colon, to the liver, to the spleen, to the kidneys, to your tissues, and to your immunity. And we break everything down into the same exact format that I just did here. So if you are a nutritionist and you're wanting to have an elemental format for what you already do, this class was really designed for you. You can be somebody who wants to use it yourself, but it was also designed for our students who are becoming practitioners in the world. But it is also designed for you to learn how to be your own practitioner, right? And just imagine the lists we have. We also break down every protein, fat, carb, hot, cold, wet, dry. So like, where does lamb stand? Where does venison stand? Where does beef stand? Where does fish stand? What are your plant proteins? What are your animal proteins? We go the distance and we just make it so that it's just allowing every single client or every single part of you be an individual and know how to track your body. Our symptoms are telling us everything we need to know. It's really just a matter of learning how to map and assess our symptoms so that we figure out what the body is trying to tell us. And so that's what we do in this class. And we made a special, price for you. So, please look it up. I think we took it down to our earliest early bird price for y'all. So, you can, I think it's $5.99 for the first 7 modules, and then it's another $5.99 for the second 7 modules that start in January. And so I just really want to invite you to join us. And look up Mary Sheila too, so you see my co-teacher. We are just a brilliant little combo because we hold different knowledge, but we have the same passion for what we're sharing. And so you really get a true wholeness there with the two of us being your teachers. So I hope you join us for that. Yeah.
James just posted the early bird discount code in the chat, everybody. So take a look at that if you're interested in that. So that will help you get a discounted price on that. You know, DeAnna, in talking about this right now of assessment and how important assessment is in Ayurveda, and I think another way of framing it is assessment is about gifting ourselves with attention, paying attention. And with that attention to recognize what we're feeling, what we're thinking, what's moving, what's not. All of these elements that you brought in are so beautifully applied when we pay attention.
That's right. And being able to, you know, some people don't pay attention because they don't know how to track their answers. So we're afraid to pay attention to ourselves because we don't know if we're going to be able to get to the bottom line, and we don't feel safe enough to pay attention. And so some people, it's really a matter of like, hey, if you can pay attention because you have the safety of this list of symptoms that are going to help you come to a solution, it just makes you feel better than that idea of like, I'm going to pay attention to me, I'm going to track all my symptoms, and now what? You know, now I go see my doctor, what do I do now? You know, and knowing what you need to eat. So I love how you just really played that out on like, it's really a beautiful way of learning how to pay attention and being safe enough to know that, you know, you're going to be able to track your answers.
All right. You know, a couple things about bringing in the ears, raised questions for a number of people. So you mentioned bringing in the ears as a vata system. How do we get nutrients specifically into the ear? How do we treat this?
Okay. Well, first thing is the true long-term answer is the trine of hydration. We need electrolytes to assimilate water. We need essential fatty acids to absorb water into our cells. And we need liquid exchange of probiotics in our gut. So the true long-term answer is the trine of hydration: electrolytes, EFAs, and probiotics.
Great.
Now, electrolytes are quick. They might help a little, but EFAs and probiotics, they take a couple months to actually rebuild and secure. So you may not see a big change here for about 3 or 4 months, but in the long run, it's going to keep it away the longest. So that's your long-term remedy. In Ayurveda, we always have long-term stable remedies, and then we have the like, how do I change that right now? And how do you change that right now is by doing oil in the ear. Now, if you put too much oil in your ear, you could clog it up. So you want to start with 1 drop, really massage the ear, pull on the ear to open up and elongate the ear canal. And 1 drop is going to absorb. And if it does clog up, you just wait for it to pop, and then you do 1 drop in this ear. If I was going to give something super simple, it'd be sesame. And sesame would be kind of the anybody oil, even though it's slightly warming, you know, but it is the most absorbable into the eardrum. And just 1 drop. But there's another way you can get to the ears, which is through the back of all your facial bones and all through your cranial nerves, and everything drains in and joins the eustachian tubes. And that would be taking like a teaspoon of oil and actually doing what's called nausea, which is snorting oil. Okay, so if you've never heard of this before, it's like very common knowledge all through Asia. And they do it a lot in Chinese and Korean medicine too. And also a lot through Africa also, where they every day they take a teaspoon of oil and they snort it back. If you use a dropper, it's going to go down into your throat, into your stomach. So you really want to, and it gets up into the lymph in your brain, and it gets in behind the 12 cranial nerves behind your eyes, and it starts opening up the sinuses, and it lubricates the eustachian tube and calms down the eardrum. So I can tell you oil in your ear, but I know that you're only going to be able to do so much of that, and only one drop at a time. So that would be one. The other way we do ringing in the ear, and we'll see what the other questions are, is steam inhalations. So you just boil water, and then you put, like you could just do a really beautiful mint, from the yard, or even mint tea, or chamomile, or ginger, if you have some ginger root, and just boil it in the tea, put a towel over your head, and you do a steam, and you get that steam up through your sinuses, and then you put your ear down to the steam, and you steam out your ear, and it nourishes and lubricates, and it gets water into your ear without getting water trapped in your ear. So what we do, especially right now for the smoke that we're living with, this is my daily routine for upper channels: steam inhalation, neti pot to clear it out, and then nausea oil, little drop in my ears, and a snort back in my sinuses. So you actually opened everything up and moisturized it, you cleansed it out, and then you re-lubricated. So great for smoke, great for chemical exposure, which is all upper channel, but also great for monkey mind, which is just the mind chatter that dries us out, and really it's just too much communications going on in the brain, and that does make ringing in the ear.
Well, that leads to questions on insomnia.
Yes, it does.
Like calming the mind there. It's like, oh, that raised some hands here.
Yeah.
Insomnia is one of the most common problems in this country. I could say, in many countries, but I can speak to this one so well. And I think that crosses all doshas.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Okay, so a couple things I would say that might be different insomnia. Like, I don't want to just repeat what we might know. Like, sure, you could do some sedating herbs, or you could do some nervines, and that can be all good. Skullcap, passion flower, there's a spikenard essential oil, 6 drops before bed, put on the jaw and rubbed on the ears, not put in the ears. Spikenard is brilliant for that, and I have that in my store online. But those are some things we kind of think of: sedating to calm down, to go to bed. I'm going to go back to what I just said, not just to repeat, but if you know that it is about your mind chatter, anything you can do to clear your mind. So it would be the same routine: do a steam, do a neti, do that nausea in your nose. It would also be oil pulling in the mouth, because you want to drop out your jaw if you want to go to sleep. In Ayurveda, they say drop out the jaw is like turning your off switch of your light to go to bed. So they believe if you drop the jaw, and if you rub and drop the ears, and if you can even massage your shoulders and get yourself to drop out of your brain, you're going to be able to combat insomnia better. So all upper channel oilination is sleep time. I like to do it to transition from work. So I work, and then I come home, and I just immediately want to drop into me, DeAnna. I would just want to, put my work down for a minute and just kind of drop into my personal self. So that's how I transition from work to home, even while I've been working at home.
I think that would help also with cortisol. I mean, monkey mind for sure, separating from work to personal.
It's all about the
really important, but it's adrenals. I mean, the spike of adrenaline and cortisol that's running so high all the time, preventing people from sleeping.
And I think we forget that adrenaline is so hot and dry that it really flares. Even hot flashes are based on the cortisol and adrenaline imbalances. It might be more of a natural timeline for people, but they're based on you're getting too dehydrated and inflammation can happen. And that is adrenaline. It is the driest, hottest hormone in the whole body. And so it just hikes up into that brain. So let me just give another little piece on neti pot, okay, and how great it is for insomnia. Because neti means third eye. So we think of neti pot as clearing sinuses. So what's that got to do with insomnia? Actually, that neti pot is moving through your pituitary, through your third eye, and coming out and down through your hypothalamus. When you do the other side, backwards, but pituitary, third eye, hypothalamus. So you're clearing your story when you do a neti. You're not just clearing congestion. You're clearing story, you're clearing your mind, and you're clearing out your eyes, where all those sensory and motor organs, your 12 cranial nerves reside. So if we really want to look at insomnia, we got to calm down the nerves, drop down the jaw, lubricate, clear our story, and then be able to actually land down into the adrenals and think about hydration. Because the only time our adrenals and our adrenaline and cortisol levels are really getting off kilter is when your kidney oceans are out of water. Those adrenals sit right on top of your kidneys. There's only a little thin layer of adipose tissue between them. So the moment your adrenals are in fight or flight, survival, it's only because the kidney oceans are running out of water. So when I think of adrenal support, it's not just how do I target adrenal or how do I build or stabilize their cortisol. I'm always thinking, how do I get more water in the oceans? And how do I make sure those kidneys are really cycling that water throughout the body? And that becomes electrolytes. Electrolytes are the quick way to get there for kidney, and essential fatty acids are the long-term way to replenish your ocean kidneys. So kidney health is adrenal health, and it's probably been the best way I've been able to target this conversation instead of chasing hormones around. Hormones like to balance themselves out. They need the right terrain to do it.
Sure. For people that can't do neti pot, that the water just doesn't flow, it causes discomfort and pain to keep trying. What's that about?
Okay, I love that question because I can totally answer it.
I'm so glad.
Isn't it great to have questions? I'm like, I can answer it. Okay, 2 things about the neti pot. One is you want a good ocean salt. It should have the name of an ocean, like Celtic or Atlantic gray, which are magnesium rich. They're the best ones to use. If you're using less salt because you don't want to use salt, right? Because maybe it's table salt or something, please don't use that. But if you use less salt thinking you're helping, it burns and it does not feel good. Straight water running through your sinuses does not feel good. So usually people are not thinking this is great magnesium rich electrolyte salt straight from the ocean, unprocessed. I always say unprocessed salt, processed salt. Do you like processed food? I don't like processed food. I eat whole food. So what does whole salt have to offer you? That's pure electrolytes. So we have to learn to trust unprocessed salt and use enough of it in the neti pot not to have pain. The next part of that question that I can answer, it's about how you do the neti, okay? So really quick, it doesn't even take long. Everything from your nose up has to be completely open and relaxed. And the way we relax and open those upper channels is by constantly breathing through the mouth. So if you swallow, or if you're holding your throat and that's going to make you hold in your sinuses. And then it's just going to keep draining down into your throat and it just doesn't feel good and it feels like you're drowning. So the whole idea is to relax this upper channel. So if this is my neti pot, I have one right there, but I'll spare the moment of getting it. Let's pretend. This is my neti pot. I'm going to put it in my sinus. I'm going to put it aside. So I have gravity feeding through. And this is how I'm breathing. The whole time. Okay. If I swallow or hold my breath, it's going to push back up in and kind of give you a little pressure headache, and it's going to drip down in your throat, and it's going to be really uncomfortable. So it's really about the method. and the salt.
How much salt? And you said a brand or two?
Yeah, so there's Atlantic gray salt, which is our most local magnesium-rich gray salt. It could be Celtic from the Celtic Ocean, but Atlantic gray is what I sell because I like that it's local and I can give the best price. And I know it's solar sun-dried, so I like the process. And it's pretty refined. You can also cook with it, so you get electrolytes in your food. And it's a half a teaspoon at the least amount per neti pot, not 2 neti pots, because you always do 1 neti pot, empty, fill it up again, do the other neti pot. So half teaspoon each one, but you can use up to a teaspoon and it just makes a more electrolyte rich, more cleansing. So if you have a lot of congestion, use a teaspoon of salt. If you just want to clear your story and kind of learn how to do this, half a teaspoon is plenty for daily use.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. One other point that I wanted to bring up about the trine of hydration and probiotics. I've been working so much more with prebiotics than probiotics. It's like prebiotics to build. Let the food generate and populate, as opposed to just taking a probiotic powder or pills or things like that.
That's right.
You're nodding in agreement.
Oh, I love it. I mean, prebiotics, the thing about it is, like, you got to have a leader to build a colony. So those prebiotics are the leadership, you know, they're the ones who are like, hey, everybody, come community, let's work together, you know, and let's take your bacteria and your bacteria of all those pro supporters. So probiotics are like what I say is supporting biotics, whereas prebiotics are the leadership. So sometimes someone will take tons of probiotics and they just don't work because there was no leader to really colonize and use them. And that's why some people will be like, I take probiotics and I get sick, you know, and I always say, well, you probably need a prebiotic. And the probiotics just, they can't do anything without a leader to help them. So I am a huge fan of prebiotics. Plus, prebiotics are in so many different things. Like, we can really get them from like a wide range of vegetables and fruits. That's right. You know, and things that we should be eating every day. And then we can also start building those probiotics with like all our cultured foods and our fermentation. And a lot of those have pre and pro. But yes, you got to spore a colony. So those prebiotics become really, really important. I'm in complete agreement. Probiotics are more wet though. If you're going to look at hydration and lubricating, probiotics are more lubricants to keep the colony happy. You know, where prebiotics are more like your leader whippersnappers that are like, charge, let's do this. They're really action oriented.
Yeah. All right. DeAnna, this has really been fantastic. You've shared so much tonight, and hope everybody has learned a lot. You gave some great tools and handouts here for us to reflect back on. I wanted to also let everybody know that DeAnna has generously offered a copy of her ebook, The Trine of Hydration. So any of you can have that. Just please email to info@dhyana.center.com. That is written in the chat box right now, so you have that to be able to access that. It's a great little book, and we'll certainly support the content of this webinar. It's been fantastic. So I want to remind everybody that we were recording this, and it's a good thing. And James will have this posted up to our website in just a few days. You'll find it under archived webinars with years of additional fantastic content that we have there. But come back and look for this. Also, you know, there's going to be a survey to fill out after the webinar ends, and I ask you just to take a few minutes. It doesn't take long. There's just a few questions. It always helps me so much to hear your feedback and any comments that you have about this presentation. So I sure appreciate you taking the time. I want to let you know that our next webinar is on October 20th with Laura Kopek, and she's going to be talking about the learn, speak, and educate about nutrigenomics and how to take the science of genetics into the conversation with our clients. So nice follow-up to this, interesting also. Yes. And then, you know, our monthly All About Alumni series we have one tomorrow, October 7th at 12 noon with graduate Amy Gernat. She's a graduate of our WISE and also the nutrition consultant program. So she's going to be talking about all of her postgraduate activities or accomplishments and her challenges too, and how she's overcome them. So this will be a good one to tune into for sure. And also we've had so many previous excellent graduate interview presentations. So check those out in our archive, especially people that are interested in Hawthorn and interested in our programs, or for those of you that are just starting out in your coursework. These are so inspiring and motivating and revealing of the plethora of ways that you can use your Hawthorn education. So take a look at that. And if we've inspired you to learn more about health and nutrition with our webinars, then check out our website for the programs that we offer. And for more personalized detail, there's always our admission advisors to support you with that. So all that said, this concludes today's presentation. And I'm grateful to you, DeAnna, for what you brought to us today. Certainly grateful to James Bernardinelli for engineering this and helping us all with the slides and all the technical things tonight. Thanks, James. And, thank you again, DeAnna. I want to thank everybody for sharing this educational experience together. I want to wish you all the best of health and look forward to learning more together at Hawthorn University's webinar and all about alumni series. And, in the meantime, I'm going to continue to practice my Ayurvedic health because it matters so much. That, and I think I'll put in some compassion and kindness too, because what we practice grows stronger, right, DeAnna?
That's right.
So let's practice what we want to grow.
That's right.
Thanks, everybody. Take good care. It matters so much.